In the history of aviation, there has never been a plane more groundbreaking than the B-2 stealth bomber. Capable of flying anywhere in the world undetected, the B-2 can arrive over its target, release precision munitions, and escape confident in the fact that the bombs will hit their targets and that the plane will return home safely. Revolutionary in design and capability, the B-2 represents the culmination of many disciplines and sciences, from aeronautics to stealth to bombing itself. It also has a distinction unshared by any conventional aircraft. For the entirety of its service life, the B-2 has never been detected, targeted, or engaged. The B-2 is flown exclusively by the United States Air Force and is the most sophisticated flying machine in existence. Its creation relied on 100 years of bombing experience, the evolution of computers, radical jumps in engineering science, new approaches to aircraft design, and a new generation of weapons called smart bombs. Among the personalities involved were a visionary American aircraft designer and an unrecognized Soviet physicist. The story of the stealth bomber begins during the first days of bombing. Early World War I bombers were neither purpose-built nor particularly sophisticated. Aviation was in its infancy, and bombs were often carried aloft in the pilot's lap to be tossed by hand at targets on the ground. Technology had advanced by the time World War II began. Faster bombers carried heavier weapons over targets protected by early warning radar, anti-aircraft guns, and high-speed interceptor aircraft. By 1944, two distinct schools of tactical bombing had emerged from the war above Europe. After suffering staggering losses during daylight bombing raids, the British conducted their bombing at night. Small bombers called Mosquitoes would be launched in the general direction of a target. Spitting fire from their engines, the Mosquitoes would proceed without radio contact or formation towards the vicinity of the target. Flying high and in the dark, these small bombers were very hard to detect. Far ahead of the main bomber force were bombers designated as Pathfinders. These planes were flown by the best navigators in the Royal Air Force. Their mission was to drop incendiary bombs on the target, producing bright flames and creating an easily spotted target for the main bomber force. Bombers would then head toward the fires, drop their bombs, and individually make their escape. This decentralized approach, with British bombers coming from all directions to bomb one target, was difficult to defend against. By contrast, the United States relied on daylight bombing raids consisting of hundreds of bombers in tight formation. The B-17 was an enormous plane, with a crew of 10 and defended by 13 50-caliber machine guns. In fact, the B-17 carried so much weight in machine guns, ammunition, and defensive gunners that its bomb load was the same as that of the two-man Mosquito. Escort planes didn't have the range of bombers, which meant the big planes were usually over targets with little protection. Although gun turrets protruded from every side of the B-17, the slow, tightly packed fleets of bombers proved easy targets for the fast, heavily armed German interceptors. Because they dropped their bombs as one, the bombers flew in complicated formations, designed so that they didn't drop bombs on each other. Advancements in fighter technology, as well as enormous industrial output, were the two factors that allowed the U.S. to turn the tide of the bombing campaign. Under the cover of new escort fighters, the 8th Air Force began launching bomber missions in excess of 1,000 bombers, with 600 escort fighters. British Mosquito bombers suffered a fraction of the losses endured by the B-17s. While the British approach demonstrated how effective bombing could be when utilizing bombers that were difficult to detect, the U.S. would continue to use large bombers in high-altitude formations until the 1960s.
It would take whole fleets of aircraft to fly over a single factory or a single bridge, dropping tons and tons of bombs with the objective of destroying that one bridge or destroying that one factory.
Following World War II, vast sums of money were spent on bigger, faster bombers with larger payloads. The United States had powerful new weapons and an equally powerful new enemy, the Soviet Union. In the event of an all-out war, the U.S. needed a new bomber that could carry the enormous atom bombs deep into the heart of the USSR. Two radically different designs emerged to answer this call. Built as a flying wing, the YB-49 could carry the same bomb load as a larger bomber, using less power and thus less fuel. Built by visionary aircraft designer Jack Northrop, the all-wing design reduced drag almost completely. Although initial tests were favorable, it was too far ahead of its time. The trim efficiency of the YB-49 lost out to the brute force of the enormous Convair B-36. Powered by 6 massive pusher propellers and 4 jet engines, the B-36 was one of the only aircraft of its day capable of reaching the Soviet Union. Defended by 16 20mm cannon mounted in computer-controlled retractable turrets, the B-36 was the largest, most heavily defended U.S. bomber ever built. Although it required more crew and more fuel than the YB-49, the huge B-36 was an imposing bomber with an enormous 86,000-pound bomb load, 14 times the capacity of the B-17. The B-36's enormous bomb bay made it the only aircraft capable of carrying the newly developed hydrogen bomb. Despite its success as a bomber, the B-36 had been conceived in the early days of World War II. By the early 1950s, as jet fighters and missiles began to appear in the sky, the B-36 became obsolete. As engineers stripped out the B-36's complicated defensive gun turrets, Boeing delivered the B-52. The B-52 became the mainstay of the U.S. Strategic Bombing Force and continues to be a formidable aircraft today. Powered by 8 turbojet engines clustered into 4 pods, the B-52 had ample room along its wings for the newly developed cruise missiles. The wings were swept back like a fighter to reduce drag, and were so long they needed landing gear at the tips. Bombing tactics hadn't changed since World War II. Large fleets of heavy bombers flew in high-altitude formations to targets, released weapons as one, and returned home. Conventional wisdom told military planners that the Soviet Union couldn't engage targets over 50,000 feet. Altitude, not guns, would keep the bomber fleet safe. In 1960, the Soviet Union shot down a U-2 spy plane, which had been flying at 70,000 feet. In the event of an all-out war, a bomber assault at 50,000 feet was doomed. The answer was to fly low and come in under the radar. Limited by terrain and the horizon, ground-based radar detects incoming aircraft in a cone-shaped pattern. The higher an aircraft is, the farther out the radar can detect it. By flying at low altitudes, bombers could delay detection and reach their targets with less resistance. Most U.S. bombers had been designed to penetrate enemy airspace at high altitudes and supersonic speeds, and were completely mismatched for the task of low-level flight. The exception was the B-52. After some minor updates, it proved to be a very stable low-level bombing platform. The new tactics were more successful than high-level bombing had been, but the lumbering bombers still required massive amounts of support and escort planes to successfully complete their missions. In 1972, the U.S. began the Linebacker II bombing raids. Designed to bring the North Vietnamese to the negotiating table, B-52s hammered North Vietnam around the clock for 12 days. The sophistication of Soviet-supplied air defenses in the north meant that over half the planes launched during the bombings were support or escort planes. Some planes filled the sky with clouds of aluminum strips called chaff that confused ground radar. Other planes, called wild weasels, intentionally drew fire so that they could respond with special missiles designed to home in on defensive radar and surface-to-air missile sites. Based on the scale of the North Vietnamese air defenses, and the fact that the Soviet Union would certainly employ an even more sophisticated system, conventional bombing raids against the Soviet Union appeared impossible with the B-52. A new bomber was needed. The Rockwell B-1 Lancer seemed to be the answer. Designed for supersonic flight at low altitudes, the B-1 was fitted with a special terrain-following radar that maps the ground in front of the plane and lets it fly at less than 100 feet. Although it flew very low and very fast, the B-1 was still susceptible to detection by radar. At the same time as the B-1 was being developed, a small group of scientists was designing a revolutionary aircraft that could not be detected by radar. They called it the Stealth Fighter. The new aircraft could leisurely enter enemy airspace, drop its payload, and exit unharmed. Designed on the limited computers of the early 1970s, the F-117's strange shape allows it to deflect radar signals away from targeting systems, rendering it extremely difficult to detect. Although it can carry only 2 smart bombs, the stealth fighter proved its effectiveness in the early minutes of the 1991 Gulf War, when flights of stealth fighters destroyed Iraq's entire command, control, and missile defense network without being detected or engaged. The next evolution of stealth was called the Advanced Technology Bomber. It incorporated research gleaned from the stealth fighter program, plus numerous new features. These included a decreased radar cross-section, lower acoustic noise, a small visual profile, decreased electromagnetic emissions, and a decreased infrared signature. The official term for all of these features is Low Observable, or LO. Officially unveiled in 1988, the ATB would come to be known as the B-2 Spirit and would enter service in 1993. Nearly impossible to detect, the stealthy B-2 can carry a wide variety of weapons on internal rotating launchers. These launchers let the B-2 carry any combination of cruise missiles, smart bombs, and sea mines. Smart bombs are assigned targets by computer and are guided by satellite, meaning the B-2 can engage as many as 16 different targets simultaneously. Its low observability, mixed with the unique weapon delivery system, means the B-2 can arrive over a target with no warning, release 16 different weapons, destroy 16 different targets, and leave without the enemy knowing what happened. When it rolled onto the tarmac at Palmdale, California, the Flying Wing bomber carried the name of Jack Northrop's company and had exactly the same wingspan as his 1943 bomber, the YB-49. Standing at the podium, the Master of Ceremonies said simply, "Jack Northrop, we salute you."